Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into some unexpected consequences of performance measurement. We'll be uncovering how systems designed with the best intentions can backfire, sometimes even leading to, well, negative social impacts.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox,
hmm
Trying to measure and control something can actually distort it in totally unforeseen ways. So we'll be delving into this phenomenon with some real-world examples, and we'll be exploring those underlying mechanisms at play.
Let's just jump right in with a classic example, the cobra effect. During British rule in India, the government was dealing with, well, with a cobra problem in Delhi. And to try to, get rid of these cobras, they offered a bounty for every dead cobra. Seemed pretty logical, right?
Yeah, on the surface, it seems very straightforward. But the seemingly rational solution, well, it led to a pretty unintended and ultimately harmful consequence.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how this all unfolded. People, they realized the financial opportunity, so they began breeding cobras just so they could claim the bounty.
Exactly. And that resulted in a pretty significant increase in the cobra population. When the government finally realized, hey, this isn't working, and they scrapped the program, well, all the breeders just released their now worthless cobras, which of course just made the problem even worse.
And this, I think, really highlights a crucial point. Just focusing on a single metric can really obscure the bigger picture, sometimes leading to pretty detrimental outcomes.
Yeah, the cobra effect is a great illustration of a broader principle, Goodhart's law. It states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. It was actually coined by an economist, Charles Goodhart, while he was observing British monetary policy back in the 1970s.
So essentially, if you only look at one metric, like as your target, you can really warp people's behavior and create some pretty perverse incentives. They just start gaming the system, and they achieve the desired metric, but not necessarily the intended goal.
Exactly. Imagine, for example, a company that only focuses on their stock price. They might end up prioritizing short-term gains over long-term sustainability. And that could lead to ethical lapses or even harm to employees or customers in the pursuit of a higher stock valuation.
Yeah, and this kind of narrow focus can have some really detrimental social consequences.
Hmm.
Like, imagine a healthcare system that only looks at the number of patients seen. They might achieve a high patient turnover, but at the expense of patient well-being.
Absolutely. The pressure to meet specific metrics can have some really unintended and often really adverse social effects.
Okay, so let's turn our attention to academia. We see some similar patterns emerge when we use things like journal rankings and citation counts to evaluate research quality and allocate funding.
Right. These metrics can actually incentivize researchers to prioritize getting published in those prestigious journals, even if those journals aren't the best fit for their research, or even if they have to, well, engage in some pretty questionable practices to get published.
It's that whole publish or perish pressure. Sometimes it even drives researchers to engage in post-production misconduct, meaning they manipulate the system after their research is already done. Not faking the research itself, but manipulating the system afterwards.
Yeah, for example, they might create fake peer review accounts to give their own work glowing reviews, or they might participate in citation rings, which are basically groups of researchers who just agree to cite each other's work regardless of relevance, or even just plagiarize sections from other papers, all just to add more publications to their CVs.
So essentially, it's not really about producing valuable research. It's about inflating those metrics.
Right. And ultimately, that undermines the integrity of scientific research, and it can really hinder genuine progress.
Yeah.
What should be a collaborative pursuit of knowledge just turns into this competitive game of manipulating metrics.
That's a little disheartening to think about that such a fundamental field as scientific research is susceptible to these kinds of perverse incentives.
I know, but it's true. The allure of these easily quantifiable metrics, it can be so powerful, even in fields where the true value actually lies in more nuanced and complex outcomes. We need to be aware of these potential pitfalls and really strive for a more holistic approach to evaluating and incentivizing meaningful
It
contributions.
seems like this fixation on metrics can really seep into any system, even those designed to measure and improve, societal well-being.
Oh, absolutely. Take the concept of gross domestic product, for example. GDP, it's often used as like the primary indicator of a nation's economic health and progress. But if you only rely on GDP as a measure of success, you might end up with policies that prioritize short-term economic gains at the expense of long-term sustainability and even, social equity.
So a country could be like boasting about impressive GDP growth while simultaneously experiencing things like widening income inequality or neglecting like environmental concerns.
Exactly. GDP doesn't take into account things like the distribution of wealth or the quality of life or even the environmental impact of economic activity. Focusing too much on this single metric can really mask some pretty serious underlying societal issues.
It's almost like judging a person's health just based on their weight, without considering things like their diet or how much they exercise or even, any underlying medical conditions they might have.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Just like someone can be overweight but otherwise healthy, a country can have a really high GDP but still suffer from social ills like poverty or lack of access to education or even environmental degradation.
So how do we like break free from this narrow focus on easily quantifiable metrics? How do we start incorporating a more holistic view of progress, one that like actually encompasses social well-being?
Well, it requires a pretty big shift in mindset. We need to start recognizing that true progress is about a lot more than just economic growth. We need to look at a broader range of indicators, things that capture, that multifaceted nature of societal well-being.
So instead of just looking at GDP growth, we might consider things like income equality or access to healthcare or even like education levels, environmental sustainability, just overall life satisfaction.
Exactly. We need to move beyond that simplistic view of progress. We need to embrace a more nuanced understanding of what it actually means to have a thriving society.
This brings us back to academia. If we acknowledge that things like journal rankings and citation counts have, limitations, how do we evaluate research quality?
Yeah.
And like, how do we allocate funding in a way that actually promotes genuine scientific progress and that, actually benefits society?
That's a tough one. There's not really any easy answers there, but we definitely need to move away from this whole publish or perish mentality. We need to create systems that actually incentivize researchers to focus on the quality and impact of their work rather than just, how many publications they have.
It's like judging a book by its cover,
Yeah.
right? Or in this case, its citation count. You might miss out on some really groundbreaking research just because it hasn't like garnered that widespread attention yet.
Right. We need to find better ways to evaluate research based on its actual potential to advance knowledge or to solve real-world problems. Things that will actually contribute to the betterment of society.
Right.
That might involve looking at things like, well, how original the research is, or its methodological rigor, or its potential for practical application, its relevance to societal needs.
So we need to move beyond just counting those publications and citations and like actually start evaluating research in a more qualitative way.
Precisely. It's about shifting our focus from those quantitative metrics to a more holistic assessment of the quality and impact of the research.
But how do we actually do that in a fair and objective way? Won't like abandoning traditional metrics just open the door to like subjectivity and bias?
Well, that's a valid concern, but we have to remember that relying only on those quantitative metrics also has its own set of biases. The current system favors research that's easily quantifiable, research that's published in those high-impact journals, that aligns with the prevailing paradigms. And you know what? That can really stifle innovation and discourage researchers from pursuing ideas that might be a little unconventional, but could also be groundbreaking.
So it's like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? We need those metrics to evaluate research, but those metrics can be gamed. They can create these perverse incentives, and if we abandon those metrics entirely, well, then we have those concerns about subjectivity and bias.
It's a tough dilemma for sure, but I don't think it's insurmountable. We can work towards developing more sophisticated evaluation systems that take into account both quantitative and qualitative factors, systems that recognize the limitations of each approach.
It's about finding that balance, right, between objectivity and recognizing, the inherent value of research that might not fit neatly into those predefined categories, or that might not have those easily measurable outcomes.
Exactly. It's about fostering this culture of intellectual curiosity, a culture of rigorous inquiry and a genuine desire to contribute to the advancement of knowledge and the betterment of society.
So what steps can we actually take to cultivate that kind of culture within academia? How do we move beyond publish or perish? And how do we create an environment that encourages researchers to go after truly meaningful work?
Well, one really crucial step is to reevaluate how we actually assess and reward researchers.
Hmm.
Instead of just looking at publication counts and citation metrics, we need to start considering a wider range of factors, factors that actually reflect the quality and impact of their research.
Like what kinds of factors?
Well, we could look at things like, the originality of their research questions or the significance of those questions, the rigor of their methodologies,
Hmm.
the clarity and persuasiveness of their arguments, and, the potential for their work to actually influence policy or practice.
So essentially, we need to look beyond the numbers. We need to look at the substance of the research itself.
Exactly. We need to create a system that, well, a system that encourages collaboration and open communication, not like cutthroat competition.
So that might involve fostering those interdisciplinary research collaborations, encouraging the sharing of data and resources, and even rewarding researchers who mentor and support, their colleagues.
Absolutely. Ultimately, it's about shifting our focus,
Hmm.
from like individual achievement to collective progress, from chasing those metrics to pursuing knowledge and understanding.
This has been a really insightful conversation. It's clear that our reliance on these simplistic metrics can have some pretty unintended consequences,
Mm.
especially in areas as crucial as, societal well-being and scientific research.
It's a reminder that the world is, well, it's complex. It can't just be reduced to a set of numbers. We need to be like more mindful of the limitations of those metrics, and we need to strive for a more nuanced and holistic understanding of, of the issues we're actually facing.
So what can our listeners take away from this deep dive? The next time you come across a ranking, a performance score, or, well, any metric, don't just take it at face value.
Ask yourself, what is this metric actually measuring? What behaviors might it be incentivizing? Could there be like unintended consequences hiding beneath the surface?
It's about developing a healthy skepticism towards overly simplistic solutions. It's about embracing the complexity of the world around us.
Remember, true progress often lies beyond the realm of those, those easily quantifiable measures.
It's about recognizing that the most important things in life are often, well, they're often the hardest to measure.
Well said. It's about recognizing that progress is a concept with many facets that goes beyond simple metrics. It encompasses social, economic, and even environmental factors.
We need to be way more critical of the metrics we use,
Yeah.
understanding their limitations, their potential to really distort the things they're supposed to measure.
It's almost like, well, imagine using a hammer to measure temperature. The tool's just not right for the job.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. We need to pick the right tool for the job. And understand that one metric alone can't capture the complexity of a situation.
Right, and we've been talking about how fixating on metrics like GDP can lead to policies that end up prioritizing short-term economic growth, but at the expense of things like social equity and environmental sustainability.
And we talked about how in academia, that pressure to publish in high-impact journals, accumulate all those citations, it can incentivize researchers to really prioritize quantity over quality, sometimes even leading them to engage in some ethically questionable practices.
Yeah, and these examples all point to how important it is to consider the broader context.
Yeah.
Think about the potential consequences when designing and implementing these performance measurement systems.
We need to ask ourselves, what are we really encouraging with these systems? What behaviors are we incentivizing? Are we really measuring what we're setting out to measure? And are we creating negative, unintended consequences?
We need to take a step back and really ask what matters here.
And maybe the answer isn't in one single metric. Maybe it's in a more holistic and nuanced understanding of the issue at hand.
We have to be willing to embrace complexity, to move beyond those simple solutions.
This deep dive has really, really challenged, my assumptions about performance measurement. It's so clear that these metrics can be powerful, but also dangerous.
It's a good reminder. It reminds us that we need to use these metrics thoughtfully and critically, always keeping in mind the bigger picture and the potential for unintended consequences.
So the next time you see a metric, don't just take it for what it is. Dig a little deeper, question its validity, and really consider the bigger context.
Remember, sometimes the most important things in life are the hardest to measure.
Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive. We really got to explore the perils of performance measurement. Until next time, keep on exploring, keep on questioning, keep diving deep.